Welcome, Justin, to the Biohacker Babes. Thanks for joining us this morning. We got some morning action going on.
Yeah, a little new for some of us. But
Yeah.
yeah, thank you for having me on, Lauren and Renee. Been excited about this since we first connected a few months back. So appreciate you having me on.
Likewise, we're so excited to chat with you. And yeah, we got two Pacific Coast coasters. So thank you
That's
both
right.
for joining me this morning. Really excited to dive into this topic around some non-alcoholic options. I think the sober curious movement has just completely taken off at all-time high, and it doesn't seem to be a passing trend, hopefully. And it's just so interesting to watch this shift that's happening and how younger generations are thinking about socializing and using alcohol. Now, like you walk into grocery stores and there's like a whole wall of non-alcoholic alternatives, which is just so exciting for us. And you've created an amazing product called New Brew, but we would love to drop in and hear about your personal story and how you came into this space and what your relationship has been to alcohol and kind of your why. So anywhere you want to jump in, we just really excited to hear your story.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I mean, I can kind of start with my journey into alcohol and then away from alcohol. I started drinking at a really young age. I actually grew up in a family that made wine up in the Bay Area, Napa Valley, at a very small scale, not like a commercial winery, but like more of a hobby type thing. And so I was around wine and alcohol from like a very, very young age. And I think it just sort of piqued my interest. Like even when I was like 5, 10 years old, I was really interested in how it would change adults' behavior, right? That sort of drew me in. And it didn't take long. I think I was maybe 12 or 13 when my friends started getting into a little bit of beer, wine, whatever. And I sort of, yeah, I think that's a little bit young, obviously. And so, you know, over the high school and college years, like I developed sort of an identity that was really like had alcohol really deeply ingrained in it, right? Like I developed sort of like a party guy identity, if you will. And I think what was really happening in the background was that I was dealing with a set of mental health issues at that young age, chiefly some form of depression, which I later sort of uncovered to be a treatment resistant form of depression. And of course, I didn't know what to call it at the time or anything, but I was, in a way, even at a really young age, I think self medicating. Again, I didn't know that at the time, but I was very like confused and upset by certain things that were happening in my life. And I was drinking not only to party, but also to get away from things or to numb certain emotions. And that became the norm for me. And, it just sort of continued on into early adulthood. And, by the time I was in my late 20s and I fell in love and got married, it had gotten to the point where the consequences of my drinking were not really they were starting to outweigh the benefits, whatever benefits I was getting out of it. And I started to open my eyes to the fact that I was solving for some issue and really self medicating rather than just trying to have a good time, which is what I always wanted to call it. And it was really when I started to see clearly that the pain I had been feeling all these years and kind of repressing myself was so clearly to be found in the face of my wife. That's when it became impossible to ignore. And I realized like I had a drinking problem, right? Like I was an alcoholic. Um, a big part of the journey to opening my eyes and reframing my perspective on my relationship to alcohol, I achieved through psychedelic therapy. I had been since I was like 12 years old in some form of therapy. I, at a very young age, got onto antidepressants. So I was kind of like pushed to the tools that the American healthcare system will offer you if you say that you're depressed, for example. None of those ever worked for me, even a little bit. I think they might have even exacerbated my problem in some respects. And it was very difficult to get on and off of different SSRIs. And it wasn't until I really explored ketamine assisted therapy and later worked with psilocybin and ayahuasca. That's when I really broke things open and was able to reframe my thinking on myself, my relationship to the people around me, to the world, and to alcohol, and to see what was very obvious, I think, to a lot of people who knew me already, which is that I had a serious problem and that I was destroying myself and I was on a really bad path. So yeah, that's a long-winded answer, but that's how I arrived at the moment. About 3 years ago, I was 31 years old when I decided to leave alcohol behind entirely, and I did so. And that in many ways is just sort of the genesis of New Brew, of the company we have here.
It's a brave step forward.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. I I think you're not alone. There's so many people still dealing with that, like really in the thick of it. So I think it takes a lot of courage to do what you do, to just say, this is a problem and I got to make some changes. And I think there's not a lot of great answers out there for people too until now. Like you have things like New Brew, psychedelics I think are really big. And I used to use alcohol because I had social anxiety. And I think a lot of people do that, right? It's kind of like this numbing agent. It makes you a little bit more of an extrovert. For someone that's an introvert, you want to be the extrovert. You want to be the fun person at the party, and you use alcohol in that way. And in over time, I've realized like that's not the best way to do that. And I've changed my relationship with alcohol as well. Um, so I just want to say, one, thank you for sharing that. And I'm curious, with your journey, did you just like one day say, that's it, I'm completely cutting it out? Or did you ever consider moderation?
Mm. Yeah, no, there were many steps before I came to that point. Yeah, I can shine a little more light on that. I think it was maybe 3 or 4 years before I actually quit drinking that um, I started to take these kind of like half measures, right? And really a desperate attempt to not have to quit. I was willing to
Mm.
try anything that meant, okay, I can kind of push off what I know in my subconscious is inevitable, which is that I'm going to have to face this. Um, yeah, it was like 3 or 4 years before I quit drinking, I gave up hard liquor. It's like, all right, that's the problem, is that, at that point in the night, I moved from beer to taking like a couple shots of tequila or whatever it might be. And that's when my behavior really turns and I sort of become this other person. So if I just cut out the hard liquor, I'm going to be good to go. And I did that. I think it was good maybe for like a short period of time. And then I just started drinking a little more beer, a little more wine, a little more of this. And then I would be having like 10 or 15 beers in a night eventually and getting just as drunk as I was before. So, all right, that didn't work. I worked with, I think it was a psychiatrist or some sort of addiction specialist a couple of years after that, and got on a medication called naltrexone, which is, I don't know if you're familiar with it, but it's a medication
Yeah.
you take every day. Yeah, it kind of like curbs the positive feedback response you get from alcohol. So after you have like one drink, the second one just doesn't feel all that good, and you just sort of lose interest in drinking. So I started taking that medication, but then on a night that I was really excited about, maybe I would take half of it. I started to just justify maybe taking a day off of it or whatever. And I was doing the same thing that a lot of people a lot of addicts will do, right? I was like justifying in my own mind and trying to get around things. And so, yeah, that was a failure as well. It ended up the same way. And really, I talk a lot about the journey with psychedelics and how that helped open up my mind. Even after all of that, it was still I was still trying to hold on, and it was my wife who really gave me an ultimatum at the end of the day to like force my hand on the issue. She was prepared to leave if I didn't quit drinking, and I'll always say the greatest gift that anyone's ever given me in my whole life, is her telling me that, because that was an easy decision. Um,
Hmm.
that, my love for her was the one thing that I knew I could not abandon no matter what. It came way before alcohol. And I didn't have enough love for myself to put my self-love ahead of alcohol all those years, right? Because it was so obvious I was hurting myself. It had to be my love for her. So anyway, that's really how it happened at the end of the day. But I think all of those things kind of had to happen in the sequence that they did for it to even be possible. Like I truly, like, I did not, for many, many years, I thought it was like laughable, the idea of me not drinking. It was that big a part of my life. So, there's all that led up to it. And then, to be honest with you, I think there's a long process of undoing now, that even 3 years later, like, I feel really solid in alcohol-free living now. I really do. But there's still, like, I don't know, there's still remnants of it in some way. I'm still picking up the pieces in some respects, or learning new things about myself that I just wasn't able to learn before. It's like relearning life from scratch. It felt like being an infant almost in certain aspects of life after I quit drinking. So, yeah, it's exciting, but kind of nerve wracking making that kind of decision.
Yeah, a whole new
Sure.
world, like a whole new alive world, like feeling so much. And I can imagine it's a lot of work. And that clarity around the self-love is just so revealing and interesting because, yeah, when we're kind of self-medicating, it's like that's such a band-aid, right? It's not
Mm-hmm.
alcohol that's the problem. It's if we peel back the layers, what's really going on underneath. And I think a lot of people are not willing to go there. And I think the first step, and I would love to hear you agree, but it's just that awareness that whatever the deeper issue is, we have to acknowledge what the surface problem is. I'm curious because you labeled yourself as an alcoholic, and I know there's kind of debate, and maybe people that are alcoholics have a hard time with this. But like, what is it? How do you qualify yourself as an alcoholic? Because some people would say you're only an alcoholic if you wake up and you start drinking. Like, there's no other kind of
Yeah,
qualification, but there's a lot of nuances here. Like, what are maybe some signs that it really is masking an issue or getting in the way of you being your optimal self that are not just waking up and doing it?
totally. I'm really glad you asked that. That's a really important question. And something I've thought a lot about, because I've always struggled to identify as an alcoholic, even to this day. Like, it feels weird to say it to you. I think that I use that term because it holds meaning for people, and it helps, like, um, make this my story easier to understand for some people. But the truth is, that's just a label, right? I don't think that alcoholism means that you wake up and drink first thing in the morning. Um, to me, the terms alcoholic or problem drinker, or alcohol use disorder, whatever. There's all these different
Addict.
terms, right? They're kind of interchangeable, and they apply better to some people's situation than others. But to me, it boils down to this: like, um, is this person facing serious consequences as a result of their drinking, and yet choosing to continue doing it anyway? And that's, that's what I fit into very cleanly, right? Like, I was at a young age, like, getting in trouble with the law. I was harming my relationships. I was like skipping school. You know, the problems like piled up and up and up, and I was able to just like somehow justify continuing to drink. For me, it was always a behavioral thing. Like, I don't think I was still young. I still am young. I wasn't noticing like major effects to my health, due to the way I used alcohol. I never drank in the morning. I never drank alone, frankly. I never
Mm.
drank when I was upset. Drinking was always like something fun for me. And that was another way I was able to kind of convince myself that I didn't have a problem all those years, because I had
Sure.
that sort of stereotypical image of an alcoholic in my head. Like, oh, what, like, well, when I'm pissed off, I don't reach for a bottle. When everyone leaves, I don't have like some private stash that I go to. Like, I hate drinking alone. What's the point? Like, for me, it's a social thing. So I was like, all right, I'm good, right? But no, like, it was still just as big of a problem. It was just my own fucked up brand of that problem, right? Like, so it's in some ways it can be really unhelpful to compare yourself to that sort of like commonly understood alcoholic. Um, and I would say something similar about Alcoholics Anonymous, about AA. Like, that can be a beautiful thing for a lot of people. It's helped. I mean, God knows how many people saved how many lives. But that is also one way of doing things, right? So a lot of people who are struggling with some kind of drinking problem, I think will show up to an AA meeting as if like this is the test of whether I actually have a problem. And they don't identify with the stories that they're hearing or the people that they're seeing. And they never come back, right? And they never like really become aware of any alternative, communities or methods to heal themselves. So yeah, it's something that it's really tricky to talk about. It's even trickier to talk about for me as somebody who's like, the CEO of, a non-alcoholic sort of alcohol alternative or adjacent product, right? Because we're selling a product that is really helpful for someone like me who's moved away from alcohol, who wants this alternative, who's okay with still shifting their consciousness a little bit using like other plant medicines. But for someone who's in hardcore substance abuse recovery, it may be a really bad idea to consume our drink. So it's important to like understand the nuances of all of this, and for everyone who to figure things out for themselves, to get really curious about their own chemistry, their own relationship to things, and to listen to people's stories, but not buy into any one path or the other. You have to figure it out yourself.
And I
Yeah, it's
imagine
so
having the
personal.
support system to get the feedback, because the consequences you mentioned, I assume, are quite subjective, right? Like, we usually, people outside of us see the problem before we see it. As you mentioned, you would justify it, right? So
Yeah,
then
yeah,
people around
definitely.
you.
Listen to people, take them seriously, but don't take anyone's word as gospel, right? Like, you do know yourself better than anyone, and it's important to get like a variety of opinions from people who are around
Yeah.
you. Or that's what
Yeah.
helps me a lot for sure.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, I can actually relate to what you said about the AA meetings. This is 20 years ago when I was like, okay, maybe I have a problem with alcohol. And I went and I remember it like it was yesterday. I remember listening to the stories of the people around me and I was like, "Oh no, these people have a problem. I clearly don't have a problem. I'm not doing the things they're doing." And you're right, I left and I never went back.
Yeah.
Um and I think about James Swanwick. I don't know if he termed or created this or founded it, but I always think of what he says is you don't have to be an alcoholic to have a problem with alcohol. It's like
Mhm.
if it's impacting your job, your sleep, your relationship, if it's impacting anything, it's something you should look at. So I
Yes,
appreciate that there's like a little bit of that gray area. And
totally.
and I want to hear your opinion on like the social connection side of things, because I think a lot of people they want to drink because they feel like they connect more with others. They're maybe a little bit more open about things. And I used to believe that. But now I have learned I have more meaningful and deeper conversations with people when I'm sober. And I remember the conversations much clearer the next day versus
Mhm.
when I'm drinking. It's like very
Hazy.
superficial kind of stuff. Not that it's not fun. It could be fun, but then the next day you're like, what did we really talk about? So what is your thought on like the difference and maybe and we can segue into the other plant medicines and how like that's a real connection with other people versus alcohol not so much.
Yeah. Um, yeah. I mean, I would say that like I'll first admit that like my own opinion is colored by my own experience, of course, with alcohol, and I'm not someone who drinks alcohol anymore. But yeah, the way I see it, like alcohol is in some ways a super effective social lubricant, right? Like it will get people talking. It will get someone to talk to someone they would never otherwise talk to, right? And so like I've had the experience with all those like almost 2 decades of drinking that I did of like some of my best stories and experiences wouldn't have happened without alcohol, right? Where I like went up and like talked to that random stranger, and then like our groups of friends met and went and out and had this wild and crazy night. So like I'm not going to talk about alcohol like it's some inherently bad thing. There's probably a time and place for a lot of people to drink, just like not me, not people like me anymore.
Yeah.
But it does sort of, a room full of people who are drinking alcohol, like especially now as someone who doesn't drink, when I walk into one of those rooms, it's pretty easy to see that like you said, the level of connection is kind of superficial. It's like very surface level conversation. I think like when people are drunk, yeah, they want to talk a lot. They want to talk loud. They're also kind of talking over each other. They're thinking about what they're going to say next instead of actually listening. There's not a lot of empathy being exchanged in those conversations. And it just looks a certain type of way, because alcohol is a numbing agent. It's a disconnector. So like it's incredibly effective in doing so, right? Like you get a little bit disconnected from yourself as you drink, you get disinhibited, and then you kind of open up in this like kind of unhinged way, which can be a lot of fun in some ways, right? But it's not, to your point, it's not super deep conversation or real connection that I think is most fulfilling for us, right? Like there's nothing more fulfilling than sitting with someone and truly connecting with them and talking about like the deep dark stuff, or sharing some like shadowy corner of yourself with somebody and having them accept you and respond and relate to you. That's less common with people who are super like inebriated, right? And that is one of the things that I really love about the product that we have in New Brew, which is, has a couple of different plant medicines in it, but also psilocybin. Um, there are, other plant medicines that can make you feel a little loose and like give you that little shift in consciousness, like a slightly altered state. Yet you are in a very empathetic space, right? Where like you are really listening to people. You are more deeply dropped into yourself than you normally are. And you're like in a slightly more vulnerable state in a way. And that, yeah, I don't even know. I won't call it better, but it's just different, right? I think it fulfills us in a different way.
Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely.
All these thoughts are popping into my mind. Like if we were to poll people sitting in a bar, would they say like, yes, they feel more um disconnected from themselves, like inhibited versus uninhibited? I don't know. I feel like we have so many opinions, but what's really standing out to me is the listening piece. And I think it's a two-way
Mm-hmm.
street, like
Yeah.
listening to others, but also being able to listen to self so that you can be in conversation a little bit better. And that's what I
Mm-hmm.
personally love about plant medicines, whether it's in a social situation or just with myself. It's like everything becomes more clear. And if it's more clear, then it's more real and then it's more meaningful. Like there is such a wonderful cascade that happens there.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Yeah.
can we talk more about these plants? Like the ones that you have
Yeah.
chosen for New Brew, or if you want to go into
Yeah.
more like the psychedelics, because that's always a fun conversation too. But you've created a product with some really cool stuff in it that I've never seen in combination.
Mm. Yeah. Yeah, definitely. I can give kind of the background on New Brew, the short version at least. So it was, I think like 6 months or so after I had quit drinking, I had spent 6 months in just total abstinence. Like I wasn't drinking coffee. Like I was trying to, for that period of time, just find my absolute baseline, which I did and got really comfortable with. which I think is important. Again, everyone's recovery is different, right? But at least what worked for me was cutting everything out for a period of time, and learning how to find peace in that like 100% sober, abstinent living, right?
Mhm.
And in that period of time, sort of like towards the end of that, I got really curious about the non-alcoholic beverage market, because it was like, well, I've made this decision to leave alcohol behind for the rest of my life, yet I'm gonna still be partaking in these social rituals where people are drinking, right? Like I'm not gonna stop going to weddings or bars or birthday parties or whatever. And I gotta have something in my hand. I gotta be drinking something. So I started to look at like the CBD beverage market and just like the whole non-alc sector that had really popped up over the last 5, maybe 10 years, and was really big here in LA and in New York and some of the coastal cities especially. And I was testing out all these different products, and like I love non-alcoholic beer, first of all, like because I miss the taste of beer, and those taste exactly like beer, and it's amazing. Like I'm so glad that I got sober in a time where that exists. But a lot of this market is made up of so-called like functional beverages or mocktails. They kind of, a lot of them come in a similar shape and size can as New Brew, and they'll have claims like mood boosting or relaxing or this or that. So I was buying a lot of these, right, and like testing them out, and I found out pretty quickly like there's a lot of bullshit. There's like
Oh.
a lot of
Yeah.
marketing jargon and like a lot of placebo effect, which by the way is like a real thing. If something says it's relaxing, you're going to be like, you're going to feel a
Totally.
little more relaxed. But I did like some real experimenting where I drink it in this scenario and then that scenario, and I started to get like very curious about it. I didn't find any drinks that made me feel any type of way when it came down to it. And I knew from not only myself, but a lot of like the people around me who were maybe not quitting drinking, but they were taking space from it. Like they were taking a day or a week or a month or sometimes a year off. I knew that there was this movement happening away from alcohol. And that's what this whole like beverage market was developing in response to, right? But I could tell that like, yeah, there are certain people who are in pursuit of total abstinence, right? For whom like they have such an addictive personality or such an issue that they shouldn't consume anything that alters their consciousness at all, or they're better off not doing that, right? But I think most people fit into this larger bucket where they're looking for better functional ingredients than alcohol, because alcohol is just hyper dysfunctional. Like it can be really fun, but just as a drug, which is what it is, it's pretty destructive for like a very large percentage of people who consume it regularly. Like it's a neurotoxin. It destroys pretty much every part of your body's operating system. It causes cancer. It fundamentally changes your behavior in the moment and over the long term. Like it can alter your personality. It wrecks families. Like there's, right now, I think the CDC just put out a report that like 500 people are dying every day from alcohol related causes. It has this massive economic impact on our country. And yet it's the only thing available in that ceremony of drinking that we all participate in, right? It's really kind of weird that it has this stranglehold over that core social ritual that's been a part of humans since human history began. So it's hyper normalized, right? We all think it's just like the only option. You're either like when someone says, "I'm going to go have a drink," we all know what kind of drink that is, right? That means alcohol. We're sharing a drink. That's an alcoholic drink.
Yeah.
So I started to think deeply about that and how like perverse and just weird that is, right? Like there's so many other experiences to be had. There's so many other like feelings and cool psychoactive, especially plants, that exist on this earth and have been here longer than us. And yet none of the ones that actually make you feel something have found their way into a ready to drink beverage. And so that's where the idea for New Brew kind of started. And it was several months later that I was on vacation with my wife, and we stumbled into a kava bar, and we tried this mixture of kava root and kratom leaf, which are the same two plants that we use in New Brew. We tried it in like a coconut shell, and it's more traditional serving, and we were kind of blown away by it. Neither of us had tried either plant before, but we felt super open-hearted and like grounded, kind of tapped into ourselves and each other. We felt relaxed. We felt like very vivacious, but we didn't feel inebriated. We didn't feel like sloppy. We weren't impaired. Our judgment wasn't altered in any way. If anything, we were like more focused and more attentive than before. I was able to go get like a really good workout in right after. So I was like, okay, this is like, I'm getting the things that I think I was trying so hard to get out of alcohol, and that I'm like relaxed and I'm really open to the people around me. I'm very comfortable, but I'm not like sloppy. Like I can go about my day. I wasn't hungover at all afterwards. So yeah, it was a revelatory kind of mind-opening experience for me. And I realized right away, like I got to figure out how to get these plants into like a tasty beverage that people can buy it just at the liquor store, you know, grocery store in the US. And that's how it all started.
We're so
Awesome.
grateful for you and your
Yes.
adventures. Yeah.
Yeah, because similar to you, I feel like I've tried all the alternatives from the local health food store, and sometimes I maybe feel something, but then I'm like, oh, it has 90 milligrams of caffeine, so maybe it's just the caffeine I'm feeling. Like,
Yeah.
like I don't know.
Or so much sugar, so you're on a little high and then you just crash.
Yes,
Yeah,
some of them have
that
like
works too.
16 grams of sugar in a little tiny can, and yeah, so we're so grateful that you created this. Um, I have a question for you about the combination. So I was just recently in Hawaii, and I went to a kava bar, which I had been to. I'd been to a kava bar in Hawaii years ago before I even knew about kratom,
It's
kratom.
funny. That's where
We'll
I
talk
had it
about
for
that.
the first time too.
But this past time I was there, I had already been drinking. I've been drinking New Brew for about a year now, and I asked them. I said, "Oh, do you use kratom in combination?" And she said, "No." She said, "We're purists here. We just use kava." And she said, "In Hawaii, if you want to get that, you have to go to like a smoke shop to get it."
Mhm.
So what are your thoughts on that? And I know there's some debate about, the safety, the purity, the testing. Like, why do some people feel like that shouldn't be combined?
Yeah, I think that it's less that they shouldn't be combined, but I think just kratom in general as a plant carries a lot of stigma around with it, right? And so
Yeah.
when you talk about people who, some people who run a kava bar, especially in the native countries of kava, like Fiji or Hawaii or Vanuatu, um, Polynesia, they may be more like purists about it. Like we serve kava, right? And kratom comes with a lot of controversy, and we can get into all of that. But kava, although it used to be controversial, like 20 years ago, there's a lot of stigma around kava. Now, not so much, and it's also like been used in those cultures for thousands of years, and so it kind of makes sense that some people who operate a kava bar would just want to keep it to kava.
Okay.
It's also like kind of strange that kava and kratom have found each other as plants from completely different parts of the world. Like kratom is native to Southeast Asia, Indonesia, and Thailand, and Vietnam, Malaysia, and kava, like I said, is more from island nations, Polynesia. So it's a bit peculiar that they've like found their way into the same setting, but most kava bars do serve both plants that I've been to, at least, because it's a beautiful combination. They somehow work super, super well together. Like the kratom gives you a little bit of like calm, balanced energy. It acts in small doses as a mild stimulant. The kratom tree is actually in the coffee family. So it's like a very close cousin of the coffee plant. Um, And kava, meanwhile, is very relaxing, like it's anti-anxiety and stress relieving. So yeah, they blend really well together. That answers your
Yeah.
question.
Yeah, and I love them together because for me, kava, like, I'll just fall asleep. I'm just, like, out. So the balance for me, it acts more almost like a cocktail, get that mental clarity, a little bit of energy. Yeah, it feels great.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. And yeah, just to go into a little more about kratom, because I think that's the most talked about aspect of our beverage, certainly, and just sort of like uh, a very heated debate that happens anytime the word is brought up, whether it's
Mhm.
on social media or in the mainstream media or even like with policymakers, lawmakers, and activists that are pro or anti kratom. It's rarely it rarely allows for middle ground or nuance. It's a very polarized debate. So I'll just speak to that. Kratom, like I said, it's this plant that's been around for forever. It's native to Southeast Asia. It's been used there pretty much safely for thousands of years. It's traditionally brewed into a tea. So, people will pick the leaves of this evergreen kratom tree and brew it into a tea, usually in the morning, and drink it throughout the day. And it acts primarily as like a productivity tool. It can be consumed to give you like that sort of mild, calm energy. I'd say compared to coffee, it's less jittery. Like coffee will get you really amped up, and caffeine, it'll get in, especially in higher doses, you get really amped up and sometimes a little shaky or trembly. And that's like one way to get energy, right? Kratom, I think, it more balances you out. So it's a more subtle energy, and I think it's a little bit more of like a flow state energy, right? Where you're able to focus more because you're calm rather than being amped up. So that's why people in those countries have been consuming it for so long, because it's amazing to get work done like throughout the day, and it also happens to like put you in a pretty good mood in the process. Um, Kratom kind of made its way over to the US post Vietnam. I think it was like a veterans that brought it over initially, and it sort of kind of worked its way and not really into mainstream society. That's now happening today, but it sort of like existed in the underground, and really its landing spot in the US was smoke shops, to your point earlier. Um, it's we sort of Americanized it, right? Like we're like, oh, it's this plant. Let's sell it like next to bath salts at smoke shops, which is like unfortunately where it landed. We're like, we'll just make it as high dose as possible, stuff it into capsules, and sell it at head shops, right? That was our response to this like amazing plant that Mother Earth presented us with, right?
That's
Um,
crazy.
so yeah, it's developed this sort of like odd reputation in our country as a smoke shop thing. It's like, oh, isn't that thing that's like sold next to the Bob Marley posters and bongs like down at the head shop? And that's
Yeah.
sort of how it's been understood. And all the other important thing to note is that I've mentioned the sort of low serving size use case of kratom. In really high servings or doses, it has a very different effect. So if you take, let's say, like 10 new brews worth of kratom at once, uh, or more, which is what most kratom products look like that you find at a smoke shop or even a gas station, you get more of a sedative kind of analgesic type effect that's it somewhat mimics like a painkiller or an opioid.
Mm.
So because our country has been amidst this opioid crisis for quite a long time now, a lot of people have sought out kratom as a natural alternative or a means of getting off of heroin or oxycontin or forms of synthetic opioids. And kratom has saved millions of lives in the process by helping people wean off of those medications. It's also helped a lot of people avoid having to go into a clinic and get on methadone or Suboxone, right, which are also just really potent opioids. So it's this natural medicinal alternative to those. And of course, for the folks who are trying to get off of something like Oxycontin and their system is used to being flooded with synthetic opioids all day, every day, when they reach for kratom, they're going to take really, really high doses of it to try to like match that effect. So a lot of those people will become addicted to kratom because it's very much possible to get addicted to kratom. Like anything else that feels really good, you can build a habit with it, right? And in particular, if you're transferring your addiction from one thing to another, you're going to be addicted to that thing. So that's how kratom is best known in the US, is this kind of like, well, that's that like opioid like thing at the smoke shop, right? Which ignores it's an entire other use case of the plant. It ignores its cultural history. It even ignores a lot of the science and the clinical data around it. So a big part of what we're doing as a brand and as a company is going out and educating people and helping people understand the plant and like including the risks, by the way, because it's not like it's completely risk-free. Like we want people to know this is 21 and up. No kids should drink this. You can build a habit with it. It's totally possible. So don't drink it every single day. Don't drink like 10 of them in a day, like have one or two, right? You know, the same way that you would with anything else that's psychoactive. Like you want to be consuming it really mindfully.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that. I have met several people through my microdosing work that transferred their opioid addiction into kratom addiction. And then they were like, let's try psilocybin to get off of that. And it is really interesting. As you mentioned, it's like if we're ignoring kind of the root issue, even the most native and pure plants can still be abused. Same with psilocybin, really any of those plants. What about the particular strains or colors that maybe if people start kind of searching the internet for, you know, on Reddit, it's just like an explosion of like, this color's bad, this color's good. And people are just really kind of going at each other about it.
Yeah. Yeah. I wouldn't call myself an expert when it comes to kratom strains. They're broken into generally three groups, like there's white, green, and red. I think that it's mostly a marketing thing. Like the reality is those are all coming from the same tree. Those leaves are coming from the same tree. The white, green, and red those are developed depending on how you oxidate, how long you dry the leaves, basically. It'll produce like a slightly different looking and tasting version of the plant, if you will. Again, I'm not an expert, but I learned early on that was kind of like the kratom industry's attempt at helping people make sense of it. Like, okay, this is like sativa and indica, right? So people know like this one makes me sleepy and this one gives me energy. I've tried all three colors and never felt a huge difference myself. When it comes to New Brew, we use an extract of kratom leaf, so it's kind of irrelevant, right? Like we're pulling out a full spectrum extract that mimics the alkaloid composition that's found in the actual plant, but it's completely agnostic to the whole like white, red, or green thing.
Interesting.
Since I discovered like kratom extracts like very early on in this journey, for me personally, and this is just for me, like I really prefer extracts. A lot of the use of kratom out there is capsules that contain raw, pulverized plant matter, like the actual plant is ground up and put into capsules. For me, like that's really hard on my digestive tract, like consuming that much plant matter. It's also not how kratom is traditionally used, right? It's brewed into a tea. That's an American thing, as I understand it, like just drinking a lot of powder or capsules. But a lot of people love it. To me, extracts are just superior. Like the feeling of it, it's a lot cleaner in the system. It's more bioavailable, so it's easier for you to digest and feel the effects of it. And it's more reliable in terms of dosing. Like there's a huge variance from batch to batch when you're talking about like a raw plant versus an extract where we can lab test it and, you know, measure the dose really carefully.
Yeah, that's
Oh,
great.
nice.
And your dosing is, I believe, like on the lighter side, correct? I remember the first time I did, I'm really struggling to pronounce it correctly. We talked about this before we started recording. I've always called it kratom, and we talked about how that sounds kind of scary. You're calling it kratom,
Kratom.
Yeah.
but you also said the correct pronunciation. I feel like we got to set the record straight before I can
Yeah.
go further. Is
Kratom.
kratom?
Kratom, yeah, or
Yeah.
something closer to that. I feel like
Yeah.
even kratom is probably slightly wrong. I mean, it's not an English word, right? Like this is,
Yeah,
this is,
we're not going to get it
and
right.
I think it's said slightly differently in Vietnam versus versus Malaysia, for example, or Thailand. But it's something closer to kratom. Um,
Kratom.
and if you say it with an accent, it sounds even better. But like honestly, I've settled. A lot of people say kratom. I say kratom because I think kratom sounds crazy. It's like kratom, like it's the most
It's like
American
some
take on that
evil, like
word.
animated character that's going to kill you in your sleep.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. The kratom, the evil kratom. Kratom is kind of in the middle. I don't say like kratom because I feel like it's like when you say
Imposter.
like Ibiza, like with a lisp, you know, when
Oh,
people come back from Spain, like
Yes.
it's kind of cringy, and it's like maybe just say Ibiza because you're
Yeah.
a white guy. So
yeah.
that's
Totally.
what
I
I've
lived in
landed on.
I lived in Barcelona for a while, and I couldn't get the lisp. I was like, I'm American.
Yeah.
I
So
can't do
like
I
it.
appreciate that. Yeah.
exactly.
So
So I'm like, we're getting it
Tom,
wrong, but like let's get it just slightly less wrong is how I feel about kratom. It's good middle ground. But yeah, it's a good question.
kratom, kratom,
Okay.
kratom.
Yeah.
Okay. So the first time I tried kratom, I feel like I got to practice saying this. The first time I tried it, I did a little shot. I have no idea what the sourcing was. Someone handed it to me. It knocked me on my ass, completely knocked me out. And everyone else in the room was flying high. They were like euphoric and had so much energy. And that's been my experience with some things where my bio individual response is just polar opposite to what other people in my circle are experiencing. But I'll just say that was not a good introduction for me. It was so strong. But my experience with New Brew is I'm not afraid of it at all. It's such an easy, smooth. And of course, we have a drink. So it's like a little bit more measurable. But talk to us about the dosing and what people could expect to feel.
Yeah. So we formulated New Brew to have basically the lowest threshold servings of each plant, like the least amount that you can still actually feel. That was very intentional for a few reasons. I think for one, that's how I like to consume anything. I think like even when it comes to psilocybin, I like to microdose. There's every once in a while with a psychedelic, it's good to go very deep and do a journey. Like I'm preparing for one right now, actually. But generally speaking, I think like microdosing is the way to go with just about everything. Even alcohol, by the way, which is something I wasn't able to pull off myself, but that is the way to do it. Um, so yeah, you know, we also are conscious of the fact that most Americans have never tried either of these plants, as much as it can feel otherwise because we like operate within these circles of people who are familiar with it. Like most people have no idea what the hell kratom is or kava, and if they find our product at a liquor store, or grocery store, convenience store, whatever, and they get curious about it and they learn about it and they want to try it, like we don't want them to have an overwhelming experience. And to your point, like everyone does react to it a little bit differently. I haven't heard of anyone having like one can of New Brew and having like a really negative, like overpowering experience. But we have people who tell us like, I really feel the kava, and I'll actually drink this like close to bedtime, and which is really strange to me because there's actually a little caffeine in it too. It has a tea
Yeah.
base, like the base of it is like an organic tea. But yeah, for some people, they're not caffeine sensitive. They don't really feel the kratom quite as much, and they feel the kava, and they use it as this like relaxing happy hour or even like nighttime drink. Then we have other people who are like, I used to take Adderall, and I just use New Brew now because it gets me laser focused in during the workday. Or people who replace their pre-workout drink that they normally drink with New Brew. because they feel energized by it. So yeah, I mean, we see things across this whole spectrum. It's the same set of effects, right? But people feel them to different degrees depending on their set and setting, I guess, right? Like with any psychedelic, like what's in your system, what are your preconceived notions about what you're consuming, like the sort of placebo aspect of it. Um, yeah, like there's so much that goes into it that we're bringing to the table as the person consuming something.
Mm.
I love that
Yeah.
there's so
Yeah.
many different applications, and it's almost permission to kind of experiment and figure out what works for you. Like I discovered my sweet spot because when I first saw the caffeine, I was like, oh my God, when am I going to drink this? It's going to make you sleepy. We'll be able to sleep. And you recommended kind of doing it in the afternoon. So now it's like while I'm making dinner or transitioning from work day to evening. And like that's when I feel the best on it. It's like such a perfect transition where it does wind me down, but it's enough time to metabolize the caffeine. Is that when you're
Mm-hmm.
doing it, Renee?
Yeah. 4 o'clock seems to be like my favorite time to drink it, but I have drank it as late as like 6, 7 p.m. and it didn't impact my sleep. And I feel
Same.
like I'm sensitive to caffeine. Like if I have coffee after 1:30, my sleep is done. Like it's shot.
Mm-hmm.
But this I've had, like I said, as late as 7, and for some reason it doesn't keep me up. And I know
Yeah.
everyone's different. And actually I have a kava kratom bar like a mile down the road. And I went a couple weeks ago. I got a blended drink and they had 3 types of kratom. And I said, well, what's the difference? And of course, she said, this one's energizing, this one is neutral, and this one is sleepy. And I said, I'll do the neutral. And I said, and it was what time? It was maybe 5 or 6 p.m. And I said, this definitely won't keep me up, right? She was like, oh, no, no, no. She was like, I drink that one like before bed. It definitely won't keep you up. I was awake till 2 a.m.
Oh
No.
wow.
So clearly I
Can't
have a
trust
very,
anybody.
yeah, I was like, I clearly had a very different reaction than she does. But circling back to New Brew, I've never felt that it interrupted my sleep.
Yeah. Yeah, it's pretty mellow. Even the caffeine aspect, it's 30 milligrams, which is like a green tea, or it's like a quarter of a cup of coffee for context. Which is
Yeah.
a very small serving. It's like enough to like give a little bit of a kick, right? But it's not going to last in your system the same way a full coffee would. So I'm the same way, like as you, Renee. I definitely can have a new brew like late in the evening, and it won't affect my sleep at all. But yeah, it is different for everyone. And the other reason that we use such small servings is we want people to be able to have more than one in one sitting. Like if you go to some kind of party or other function of some sort, like you don't want to be like nursing one drink the entire night and it gets warm and whatever, right? Like
Yeah.
you want to be able to have more than one. So I feel like that's the way to go. It's
Yeah.
just small servings. It also tastes really good, so you kind of want to have more than one anyway. Um,
I
yeah,
haven't
and
I
it's
haven't done more than one yet. Once
I
I
haven't
feel so
either.
good. But
Same.
yeah,
maybe
don't then. Honestly, that it's if you get where you want to go with one, then stick with it. And I think that's for
yeah.
most people.
Okay.
Like there's some people who are like have a lot of experience with these plants, or they're just like, really like I've met like really big dudes who are like bodybuilders who will have one new brew and they're like, I don't feel it. And
Mm,
like, all right, you're a
yeah.
toucan person. But if
Yeah.
you get where you want to be with one, then just like drink water and yeah, maybe have one later. But it's not it's not like alcohol where like one drink kind of begets the next, right? And you just like you yeah, it's diminishing returns with kratom and kava. You're not going to just like feel better and better every one you have. Like I think maybe you have two if that works for you, and then you just kind of chill. Like you enjoy the feeling that you're having, and that's something I really love about New Brew, because with alcohol, I was always thinking about like the next one,
The
right?
next.
Or like getting a little
Yeah.
more messed up, right? Um,
Yeah, you kind of
and it's just
chase
not that way.
you chase that feeling with alcohol. One turns to
Yeah,
two, turns to three, like very quickly. Yeah.
totally.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And
definitely
with
for me.
this,
Yeah.
as you mentioned earlier, you can listen to your body's own communication a little bit better. So it makes sense that I mean, it sounds like we're all minimum effective dose people here, but it's like you don't need it because you're like, no, good. chill.
That's exactly right. Yeah, you're aware of what's going on in your body. Like you're not numbed out and your judgment isn't totally thrown for a loop, right? So you're kind of like, all right, I know exactly how I'm feeling. I don't really need to feel more of that, and I can just like hang out and talk to people, which is nice.
Yeah.
It's very liberating.
Yeah.
A great solution.
Yeah.
So, Justin, as we start to wrap up, tell us about accessibility. I know you're starting to release into grocery stores, or like, how can people find this? I know certain cities, but what's on the
Yeah.
horizon too?
If you're in the LA area, Southern California, or Austin, Texas, or Miami, then you're in luck because Nubrew's everywhere. We have a store locator on our website, which is drinknewbrew.com, and you can see if there's a store near you. We are also in stores all over the country. They're just kind of scattered, but those three markets that I mentioned are the ones where we have like a bigger presence, and it's very easy to find. And for anyone around the country, you can just buy it on our website too, drinknewbrew.com. We have all three of our flavors, mango, citrus, and berry on there, and it'll just show up at your doorstep. So that's the easiest way for most people.
Nice.
Yeah.
I'm in Austin right now. I'm like, okay, I need to look at the store locator. I'm like, where?
Yeah.
Yeah, you can't be far from a new brew store right now. Trust me.
Really?
It's
Nice.
yeah. We just got down there in December, and it's like been like wildfire. Honestly, like we can't keep it on the shelves there in most
Oh,
stores.
it's a
So
good place for it. Very good place for
yeah,
it.
it is definitely. Yeah.
Awesome.
Nice.
Yeah. Well, I just get it shipped to my door. Actually, I finally switched
Never.
over to the subscription, so I don't have to think about it. It just shows up.
Oh, nice.
Really
Cool.
easy.
That's
Yeah.
the way to do it. Yeah. I'm surrounded by like free New Brew 24/7. So it's a very it's a healthy exercise for me in restraint, right? Like and especially as someone who's out like, promoting and selling this beverage, like I'm very mindful about like maintaining a really healthy relationship with it myself. And when there's like a full fridge of cold new brew at all times with all three flavors, like it's a real test, which has been awesome. And I've
Yeah.
so far like I feel like I've found a really good balance with it, where and this is something I definitely want to leave people with who are like curious about trying new brew potentially. Um, yeah, don't drink it every single day. Like I would say that's true of almost any psychoactive substance. Even though it's really mild and mellow, and like when you try it, you'll be like, oh, this is whatever. Um, take days off, remind your body of what it's like to live a day without it. Like I think that's true of coffee too. Like you don't want to
Yeah.
let your like convince your body that it's dependent on anything. So maintain awareness around the way you consume new brew. Don't drink it every day. Don't drink it like you're like chugging beer. It's just a different type of thing, right? So just like sip slowly, enjoy it, um, find use for it. Like it can really help you live a better quality of life. I think like it can help you get things done. It can help you feel relaxed going into social settings without having to drink alcohol, which is a huge, powerful tool for a lot of people. But it's not entirely without risk. So like, don't build a habit with it unnecessarily.
Yeah, yeah. I love that you have that on the can, on the box, on the website, and every time I see that, I think, can you imagine if you had that kind of a label on coffee or alcohol, right? Like
Mhm.
you said with coffee, like same thing. Like you shouldn't be drinking any of this stuff every day, but you would never see that on a bottle of wine. Please do not
No.
consume every day, right? So you're being like
Yeah,
very responsible with this. So,
They don't
definitely.
care
We're
about you.
trying.
They just want to make more money, you know?
yeah. Oh,
Yeah,
that's
it's
a whole nother episode we could do. I'm sure the financial backings of the alcohol industry, but
oh yeah,
yeah,
they're indeed for sure. But yeah, we're
yeah,
that's this whole thing is like Nuru that is kind of like an exercise in us trying to set a new standard, which is self-imposed. Like these are not the disclosures on our can, and the fact that it's 21 plus is not legally enforceable in a lot of the country. It's decisions that we've made that we think are going to set the right path for these plants to land in the right place in our society, because they deserve to be accessible to people and not restricted or banned. They just need to be regulated, common sense regulations, which is happening in a lot of states, which is really positive. And we're pushing for it in California where we live. But not only to do that for kratom and for kava, but to try to like set an example of how a psychoactive substance of some sort can be responsibly marketed and sold. Like there aren't really good examples of that. And especially as the psychedelic renaissance takes hold around our country, and we're going to see psilocybin become legalized, hopefully, and other substances too. Like, yeah, we want to show people how it's done, and there's no playbook for it that we really like, so we're just kind of doing it on our own. And that means educating, being hyper transparent about what's in our beverage, like truly proactively pushing people to learn about it before they just try it. It's not like everyone should just go have a new brew. I would never say that. Like, go to our website, check out the learning center on our website, do your own research, whatever, and then figure out if it's right for you. We don't want this to be like alcohol, where it's, you know, you grow up and you just know you're going to have your first beer one day. But in reality, that's not a good idea for everyone, right? Like, everyone should learn.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you. Very appreciative.
Yeah. So speaking of that, drinknewbrew.com. We'll put that in the show notes so people can learn more. And then Instagram, Drink New Brew as well. And Justin, to close out the episode, can you leave our audience with one final piece of advice, something they should do to optimize their health? And it can be related to everything we just talked about, or totally separate. Anything you want to share.
Yeah. I guess one thing that was missing from my whole story about like how I got sober and my journey away from alcohol, I did transfer my addiction, if you want to call it that, to alcohol. I didn't transfer it to another substance. I transferred it to exercise. And like, above all, like, just as a human being, that's what I know I can consciously recommend to anyone. Like, if you're struggling with your mental health or with substance abuse, find a way to put that energy you're using in that way into exercise, because I think it's universal. I think it's true for everyone. Like, that has created the biggest shift in my life by far. It's helped me feel, good when I wake up in the morning, when I go to bed at night. It helps me stay on track. It helps every single aspect of being. So I know that's kind of generic, but like, yeah, work out, exercise, or like dance, do whatever, do yoga. Like, doesn't matter what it is, move your body. It's the most healing thing that I think any of us can do.
Thank you for sharing that. No, I think it's so powerful. It's not over. I mean, people don't do it enough, right? So even if it seems simple, it's like we have to keep saying it.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. It's maybe the best mood booster, and just so much crossover with plant medicines and exercise, like what's actually happening in the brain. It makes so much sense that we should start there and commit to it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for sharing your story and your wisdom with us today. It's such an incredible leader, and just there's so much hope and so much inspiration in what you're doing. So thank you.
Thank you both so much for having me on. I'm glad that we're building this friendship now too. I'm excited to keep in touch with both of you, and yeah, I appreciate your support with New Brew, and also just your positivity and your energy. And I'm very excited to be connected with you guys.
Likewise. Same. Absolutely.
Thank you.
Much more to come.
Yes.
So we'll share more resources in the show notes so everyone can continue their education around New Brew. And thank you. Thank you so much for today.
Thank you.
And thanks to everyone that tuned in. We will see you next time.